Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you panelists for joining. Yes, I'll lean it a little bit this way so I can, yeah, there we go. Yes, you've done this before, I can tell. So why don't we begin by setting the table? So I'm sure that many people in the room understand to a degree what impact homelessness has on their city, right? We see people wandering the streets, we see them living in tents, and so forth. But I'm not sure many people know the whole story about the municipal impact that exists. And so I want to ask each member of this panel, what is one thing that most people are not aware of when it comes to the effects that homelessness has on the city and its infrastructure?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Myra, and I'm happy to be here, so thank you for the invitation. I think this is more based on a city question, but I'm going to give you a perspective as a service provider. With the Salvation Army, I think we are very unique in the way that not only are we our service provider, but we are also a landlord. And I think when we take a look at the people that come in to our locations, is we have to understand, number one, is why is the reason that they're homeless to begin with? And how are we addressing the issues? Because in the work that we do, we want to make sure that we're addressing the reasons why an individual is homeless. But we also need to ask the question of, are they ready to go into permanent supportive housing? So we have to look at both ends. And I think this is where things could get really creative, and or we have to get really creative, because one of the things that I have found is that in recent time, within the last year and a half, the Salvation Army opened 2 permanent supportive housing locations. One is in Pasadena, which has 64 units, and one is in Orange County called the Anaheim Hope Center. And so in working alongside of these 2 sites, I learned that, sometimes our folks are not ready to go into permanent supportive housing. And what do I mean by that? Is that we have to take a look at our systems that we have in place, like a coordinated entry system, making sure that we are assessing our individuals in all capacities, and understanding and making sure that we're not just trying to place people into our facilities to meet a number, but that we're also placing people because they're ready to go into our facilities. And I say that to bring up to the attention that if we don't do that, then our facilities, our structures are at risk, right? Because you have individuals coming into our facilities that are not ready to be in an individual location, and the units get destroyed and things of that nature. But we also have the challenges with our neighborhoods, right? Our neighbors, there's a fear factor there. If there's someone who comes in, again, who's not ready to go into our permanent supportive housing locations. So those are challenges that arise, and I think that it's so critical that we, as a service provider, as a landlord, and the city officials to come together, sit at the table, and discuss how that's impacting the services that we're being rendered on a day-to-day basis. Again, housing, as we all know, is so important and is much needed. But we also have to take a look at all of our systems that we have in place and collectively work together so that we're able to have these honest conversations and talk about, really how our systems are working and the impact that it has, so that we could minimize the cost. Because at the end of the day, city, supports all of these measures. And if we're not, again, ensuring that our folks are ready to come in, then it's impacting financially, right? We're losing money, and we're not being very good stewards of that, so.
Thank you. Artie?
Well, thank you. In Glendale's a unique city. How many folks here from Glendale? Just out of curiosity, a couple? All right. So, for those who live in Glendale and are familiar with it, we're the 4th largest city in Los Angeles County. We are considered one of the safest countries of our size in the entire nation. We take great pride in our city services as a city organization, as a city council. But the challenge, this humanitarian crisis of homelessness, is one that has affected everyone, including Glendale. Our numbers are not anywhere near what other cities are facing. In Glendale, at our last homeless count, we had an 8% reduction. Only about 195 homeless people were counted. I, as well as others, believe that was an undercount. We can probably add maybe another at least 70 individuals to that, if not more. And of course, we have, with increasing housing costs, not just the homeless, but those who are near homeless, right? People who may be couch surfing in friends' homes or sleeping in a car who maybe slipped through the cracks during one of these counts, and that is a continuous challenge. Of course, we have Glendale Community College, where we know for a fact there's a number of students who are struggling with housing, permanent housing. I would say that our biggest challenge that people don't realize is that we're like a duck on the surface of the water. Things may seem calm as you drive through the streets of Glendale, but under the surface, we are paddling those, feet as fast as we can just to stay afloat and keep moving forward. And for a city of our size with limited resources and a limited budget, we are sometimes unable to meet everyone's needs. That's exacerbated by the fact that we are neighbors surrounded on many sides of our city by multiple Los Angeles City Council districts, and that's ground zero for this humanitarian crisis. So oftentimes when we're trying to help individuals and families, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. We take care of one, two more pop up, three more pop up. And we are very nimble, we are very adept at being able to address the needs of individuals and families. We've housed thousands of individuals. We have a housing first policy, but as has been mentioned by previous speakers, as well as I'm sure will be mentioned by individuals up here, and it was stated, it's not just about the housing, it's about all the wraparound services that are needed so people don't relapse into homelessness. And I can tell you a number of anecdotal personal experiences of individuals who we put into one individual, and it breaks my heart, after we got her into housing, she would not leave any room besides the restroom in the apartment. She would sleep in the bathtub, and was struggling with hoarding as well, which after a while becomes an issue for the apartment complex and the apartment manager and owners, and is not something that can be easily fixed, as we know it's a mental condition, a mental disorder that requires treatment. So I think our biggest challenge is getting everyone to row in the same direction. And unfortunately, the size and the bureaucracy of Los Angeles makes that very difficult for the smaller agencies that are neighbors of LA. And again, this is not to, I root for the success of my co-counselors and leaders in Los Angeles. Los Angeles' success is all of our success. But I'll be darned if they don't make it very difficult on us at times. And so working with them has been a challenge. Working with county services has oftentimes been a challenge. And I think that, as well as we can try and do things in Glendale, unless, again, everyone is rowing in the same direction, sometimes we row and row and we continue to remain in the same spot, as we're seeing right now in the news, as we see that there hasn't been much of a change. In fact, there's been an overall increase in the number of unhoused individuals.
I'm here as a LAHSA commissioner. It switches from chair to co-chair. I'm chair again as of a month ago, which goes in the no good deed goes unpunished category. But I have served on the LAHSA commission for a long time, and as you know, I'm a recovering politician. So you haven't made it there yet. You will become a recovering politician, I promise you someday. But I may have shared in the past, LAHSA was created out of a conversation when I worked for Mayor Bradley, which was a long time ago. I was very young when I worked for the mayor, but we sued the county of Los Angeles because we said they weren't doing enough on homelessness. And then part of this settlement was a discussion of not only raising the general relief but other things, but also the conversation about creating some entity that would link up the city and the county, and that was the Joint Powers Authority that created the LA Homeless Service Authority, which has survived all these years. I will answer the question that you said, what is kind of surprising, which is, and I see our wonderful police department here, is the fire department and the police department, our first responders, not just for crime and fires, but for homelessness, which it should not be. And so I think that's for the public, they don't necessarily always know that, but if you talk to the fire department, 85% of the calls they go to are medical related, and many of those, again, are homeless related. And guess what? It costs a lot more to send a firefighter, paramedic, or a police officer than it would to have the kinds of services that they desperately need. And so I think the public doesn't always understand the cost that it is when you have to depend just on the public service side of that with our law enforcement. I think the other piece of it that was mentioned that people also don't realize is that in many communities, people do not want to have affordable housing. And we all know, and I'm sure Salvation Army over the years has seen this, they have a great project, a great site. It's so wonderful. You're going to build a beautiful facility, and guess what? The neighbors don't want those people in their community. And in fact, oftentimes, and I think this is, this urban legend that all these people have moved from other places, and again, Salvation Army knows this better than anyone else, most people are from this region. They did not come from some other place thinking they were going to get they're going to become homeless so they can get all those benefits that the Cal State gives us. That's not the case. And so I think it is important as we talk to people about putting them, and I used to argue a bit, literally argue a bit, which I'm sure you have too with your city, some of your constituencies, which would say, I don't want people in my neighborhood. And I'd be like, well, okay, you don't want people in your neighborhood, but you won't allow that affordable housing or that transitional housing to go there. Where do you think they're going to go? And in fact, isn't it better that they're inside than they are on the streets? Which, again, I know you heard earlier some of your speakers about the Grants Pass issue and so forth, and some of the changes there, and the importance of the regional approach to that. And I'm sure the mayor's representative talked about that too. That you can't have it just whack-a-mole. So I think it is. Everyone wants the homeless crisis to be solved. They don't want it in their neighborhood, to be solved in their neighborhood. And the kinds of the people that are having to respond so quickly are oftentimes people. So that to me is, I think, something that individuals do not know. I do want to make a comment about Salvation Army, which I have said before. I love the Salvation Army. My father, when he was in the military, said, and I won't say the other organization that did not respond, but the place that he could always go was the Salvation Army. It was the place. And then Judge Pregerson, who swore me in every time I was elected and actually performed my wedding, would always say, you have to help the Salvation Army. So for decades. So I feel a particular affinity. And he's still up there saying, Wendy, don't forget the Salvation Army. So I just want to give a little plug that I love the Salvation Army.
We love you too.
Thank you, Wendy. And you've been a tremendous ally to the Army over the years, so thank you. I want to expand a little bit, though, staying with you for just 1 second, about something that you alluded to, which was the Grants Pass case. I believe you are good friends with Theana Evangelis, who was speaking earlier today, who was involved with that case very, very deeply. And I'm curious to get your take, in the wake of Grants Pass, in the wake of that decision, in a city like Los Angeles, as we know, that will have real significant change, real significant impact as far as encampments being cleared, and potentially will put an enormous stress on the system, on the infrastructure of this city. So if you would, give me a little bit more about what you envision happening in the wake of Grants Pass, and what will happen, and in your eyes, maybe what should happen.
Well, Dan served with me on the Blue Ribbon, it's called the Birch Report, Blue Ribbon Commission on Homelessness for the LA County. So it was great to have her part of that. We did it during COVID, so I literally didn't meet her in person until like 2 years after we spent all that time together on Zoom. But I think in some ways, nothing has changed for the city, and I say this in the city of LA and mayor's office. And I am not one of those who says, you could just stay here and there's nothing that we can do to not get you off of the street. Does that mean you arrest them? No. Is there a carrot and a stick approach? And I think the mayor has said in many instances, they've done all these Inside Safe and all these programs, and I don't think they've ever had to arrest anyone, and they have cleared those areas. Now, you could say some come back, how does that work, etc. But I do believe for the mayor and others, they would say, nothing is going to change. We're still going to help everybody who's on the street. We're going to use our resources to do that. We do have tools in our toolbox if we needed to, but we're not going to arrest people. The biggest challenge, and I think alluded to that as well, which is in the surrounding cities. Because what you don't want, and what the mayor has been convening a lot of people in the different cities and communities and mayors of those cities, is some other cities to say, we are enforcing the law in Grants Pass, and we will arrest you, and you must move, and we have not offered you anything that you would want to go to, and therefore they move into the city of LA, and that does not solve the problem. And so the conversation is, how do we not do that? And there's been stories, rightly or wrongly, that people are busing them in or whatever it may be. Again, it's why just moving them around does not solve the problem. And where we saw in the homeless count, albeit not a huge decrease in the city and the county a little bit up, but city of Los Angeles, but a decrease in the number, the overall number. But it's more about the numbers that go lower, that are within that, which is the number of people that are housed versus unhoused changed dramatically, and particularly those of encampments. And the mayor often we talk about is, you're going to be judged on what you see, in the street. You could have housed, and we've housed, LASA can report every year how many more homeless people have housed every year. And the challenge is there's still more people on the street, and we're not preventing them from coming on the street. Right. But we are housing more people. But we could say that and scream from the rooftops. It's not gonna matter. So I think the important part is provide services that address their needs, and they won't be on the streets of LA or Glendale or wherever, but that we cannot use something to just move people to some other municipality. And it takes a regional approach, which is, again, why a little bit of why LASA was created, to try to do that. They are not perfect, trust me. I'm sure you all can tell me how LASA has problems, so I'm here to help, yes. Shaking the head, yes. Trying to do better. And sorry, the last thing I will say, Andrew, is that we now have, we have two county board of supervisors, the mayor, mayor of Culver City, a council member in, I want to say Altadena, she's going to be assembly member. So we have elected officials now that are sitting on this board, which I think is a really important part of it.
Thank you. So this question's for you, Artie. I was coming across in researching for this panel a Brookings Institute study, 2023. And it spoke to the connection between homelessness and crime. And it was an interesting study in that one of the things that is suggested is that while a vast majority of people connect crime to homelessness, it may not be as strong of a connection as people may think. While acknowledging that crime does exist and there is a connection, again, the perception may not reflect the reality. And I'm curious, as in your capacity with the city of Glendale, what has been your experience, and what are your thoughts on that perception versus reality of crime and homelessness?
It's a very good question. Thank you, Andrew. And let me also say that, and I should have said this at the outset, that in Glendale, we're blessed to have an amazing chapter of the Salvation Army, truly doing the Lord's work in putting a roof over families' heads. I've supported them with their kettle drives, and every year when they do the back-to-school shopping experience for children going back to school, where you accompany them to the local Target to buy their school supplies. If there is ever an activity that can reaffirm your faith in humanity, it's accompanying some of these children, siblings who will go and meticulously and carefully curate what they need for the school year. I remember one year, this one girl who was shopping with her brother, accompanied by myself, looked very sad at the end. And when I asked her, is there something that she missed getting? And she said, well, I really wanted this book, but I'm at the limit of what we can spend. And I was like, sweetie, this one's on me. How do you deny a child a book? Especially nowadays, it's not like they're asking for an iPhone or anything. This child wants a book. That in and of itself is a miracle if you don't believe in God. That should restore your faith in a higher power. And so, to your question about, well, first of all, let me say that homelessness should not be a crime. Unfortunately, we live in a society and a place where too many people perceive it as such. We think of this as a new problem, but I studied history for my undergraduate at UCLA, and I will say that when you study the history of this state from boom to bust, from the gold rush of San Francisco. I just read a book called The Barbary Coast about what San Francisco was like back in the day. Really not much has changed other than technology and human nature. In the outset of the Depression, I'm reminded of a great song by the immortal songwriter Woody Guthrie, who had wrote this spectacular work. And he says in it, "California is a garden of Eden, a paradise to live in or see, but believe it or not, you won't find it so hot if you ain't got that do-re-mi." And very little of that has changed. And I don't know if it's going to change anytime soon. Sorry, I know I'm digressing here, but there are a lot of thoughts swinging through my head. I know Wendy mentioned that, former controller said that she's a recovering politician. I'm a cynical politician. I've lost some of my faith in both political parties, even though I'm a registered Democrat, and their ability to address the ills that affect us as a society. And I'm reminded of Mark Twain's words when he said, "Politics is the art of collecting money from the rich and votes from the poor and convincing each you're going to protect them from the other." And we see that playing out in real time. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's those communities that don't want the homeless community or the homeless individuals being housed in their neighborhoods. And how do you, break through those perceptions? At the same time, the concerns people have about crime are real. Now more than ever, I think everyone knows someone who's been touched by some form of larceny or crime or vandalism, and it's increased, yet all the statistics show violent crime is down, but people's uneasiness is up. In Glendale, our crime hasn't increased, I believe. There is no direct nexus or proof that there's an increase of crime that can be linked to the rise in homelessness. But certainly overarching economic conditions, I think, put pressures on individuals where a culture exists where crime happens. There's other statistics about when the most crime happens, and I remember hearing this when I was running for city clerk and then for council again, that the times when most crimes happen are between the hours of 3 to, I think, 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. And when you ask why those times, it's when school gets out, when kids are unsupervised, and they do the things that kids do when, idle hands are the tools of the devil, right? And they're looking for something to do. And I think that when you look at after-school programs that have been cut and removed from so much of our public school system and haven't been restored, every time there's a downturn, an economic downturn in this state, we kind of salami slice these after-school programs, and they're the last things that we ever bring back once, the funding comes back. Those have a compounding effect on communities. I will say in Glendale, we had one random instance of an individual who was unhoused, who murdered an innocent person. It was a complete crime of randomness. Unfortunately, one random instance like that, a tragedy, becomes the story of local myth, and people will hang all their fears and worries on that one instance. The solution to it, I think, is education, information. We are very fortunate in Glendale to have a community that's not always dismissive of affordable housing projects. In fact, this morning I just came from ribbon cutting of a 127-unit affordable housing project exclusively for seniors. And in the next year and a half, we'll break open and do ribbon cutting on another 350 units with another couple of hundred in pipeline in Glendale. But again, I don't know if doing these little drop-by-drop projects is going to address the bigger regional issue. I think that ultimately Los Angeles as a city has to step up, and the county sure has to step up and lead in a major way. And I don't know how we do that given the cost. I'll give you one number. I asked the developers today how much the per door cost was of this project. Beautiful project. It's called Citrus Crossing. It's not that far from City Hall on Broadway for anyone who wants to drive by it. Small units average about 450 square feet, studios and one bedrooms only for seniors. And it costs about $450,000 per door. I mean, think about that. At that rate, and we were very frugal. Like, Glendale is not a city that's frivolous in any way, shape, or form. And 450 square feet is not very large. But if we're talking about getting people off the streets so they feel secure, so they're not either exposed to crime or perhaps engaging in criminal activities or activities that can be labeled as crimes, $450,000 is a lot of money. But I will couple that with also this other statistic. Glendale, for Measure H funds, pays the County of Los Angeles $10 million a year. Up until last year, we were only getting $100,000 back to Glendale a year to address our own homeless issues. After negotiating, begging, and cajoling, we've moved that up to about $400,000 a year. But still, we get it. There are other communities in greater need than ours. Glendale is relatively well off by comparison. We will pay our share. We will do the right thing. But give us at least $1 back on the $10 we're giving you. If we had $1 million, over the last 10 years since we've been paying for Measure H, just imagine what we could have done in Glendale. And so those are some of the challenges that we have. It's not specifically crime. I think the crime occurring is the fact that we all like to talk about homelessness, but we don't do anything about it. We treat our fellow human beings like tissue paper, we just step over them or walk past them without realizing that any given moment, with a different roll of the dice, that could be us.
That's a great point. Thank you. Turning to you, Myra, I know that in your work with the Salvation Army, you obviously, as part of comprehensive services provided clients, you deal a lot with healthcare, with the treatment of these clients, and in looking at an often overlooked aspect of homelessness, we do see the impact that happens on the healthcare system. Apparently 20 years ago, there was a study that said the annual emergency room cost for an unhoused person could be as high as $65,000 a year. And we can only imagine what that figure is like today, in today's dollars. And I'm just curious to get your take on your experience with the healthcare aspect, the cost associated with that, and what inefficiencies you see and potential solutions that might exist to improve the staggering cost of that aspect of the homelessness crisis.
I think I could say that let me back up because I'm trying to have a lot of thoughts in my mind to answer your question. But I think healthcare is so important, and it's a crucial component, part of our participants' case management care. If we don't have the healthcare component, we're missing a huge part of their case plan. And I say it to this effect, and I have my supervisors here, so excuse me for saying it this way, but I think I could argue to say that healthcare should be mandatory within the participants that we serve. And again, this is a controversial issue because our advocates and supporters say, well, no, people should have, be able to make their own decisions and decide what kind of treatment they want to have in healthcare and whatnot. But the issue is that we have to understand that if people are not well, if they don't take care of their health, then we cannot keep them stable. I mean, that's just factual, right? And it's kind of like if I ask you, if you're not feeling well, if you're sick, right, and you have the flu or you have some sort of, God forbid, medical disease issue, are you going to perform well? Are you going to do your daily activities well? Are you going to feel well on a day-to-day basis? No. You're not going to be able to concentrate on anything else because you're worried about your back hurting, your leg hurting, you have to take all these medications, X, Y, Z. So we have found, in the time that I've been with the Army, which is close to 17 years now, in the work that I've done, I've been able to really see that importance of it, and the importance of also for us to be able to implement and support and specifically fund preventative care, right? It's so crucial, it's so important because, again, if we're able to have our folks, receive that care, then they're going to be more stable. Then they will be able to focus on all the other things that are hindrance from them to going into, again, permanent supportive housing. So, anyway, that's my...
That's fantastic, thank you. So Wendy, we've been talking about resources all day long. and the need for resources and where are these resources coming from. And obviously, wearing your hat at LASA, you know where some of these resources is coming from. But I'm curious to get your take on the role of the federal government and potentially the role of the private sector in being a resource-based solution to this problem.
Absolutely, and I think that we are in a very unique time in that the city, the county, the state, the federal government have acknowledged, even our presidential candidates talking about housing. I mean, when's the last time they talked about housing? But homelessness is not just impacting our cities, the big urban areas, but also other cities across the country that are seeing homelessness. So I think that the role that the mayor has played with the County Board of Supervisors, and as you know, I don't know if SMA mentioned today, locking arms and the importance of that. And sometimes that seems esoteric, but I will say we're all on the same page about having to do this. And the state government was with some state legislators the other day, and they talked about, until a couple of years ago, the state wasn't really part of the conversation on homelessness. They didn't provide that much money. They are now doing that. And so it's also about rules and regulations, which cost money. I mean, $450, that's like low in comparison to the city of LA, unfortunately, which is sometimes $750,000. Why? Because it takes one, the land costs a lot, but it takes so long, and there are lawsuits, and you can, all the costs that are associated with that. So I think that all levels of government have to play their role, whether it is financial, whether it is changing the rules to help it make it be easier to address the mental health crisis. I mean, I think there's finally a realization that a large portion of the people who are on the street are in a mental health crisis or an addiction, and something that Salvation Army does very well in trying to address those in every part of their program. I think from the private sector, and I'll put that both private sector and nonprofit, the role is critical. That right now, most, and I don't know if you're the state, but most of the housing that's happening in Los Angeles in the private sector is not affordable. It's not affordable housing. It is market rate housing. And so how do we incentivize and ensure that low to moderate housing is actually built, and it is something that is also financially feasible for people? I mean, it's also looking at Section 8 vouchers and being able to do project-based. I mean, the financing is critical to that. So I think the private sector is something that is essential to whether or not we're able to solve this problem. And I think essential to looking at prevention and looking at some of the areas where, again, the more you look at it, we're having more homeless individuals go into homelessness than we are serving now. And we have to stop that. Think about it. If we build all these hundreds of thousands of units, but we still have people being forced out of their units, we're going to have a problem, and it's on a day-to-day basis. So being able to provide that. So I think the private sector can help on financing, can help on building that housing, can help funding nonprofits like the Salvation Army and others that are going to be part of the solution. It is a humanitarian crisis, as he stated, that it will take all of us to do that. But we also got into this situation not just yesterday. It's been 10, 20, 30 years. So solving it is going to take a little bit of time. I will make a plug, and I think hopefully some of these cities are at least feeling a little bit better about the percentage of a Measure AH funding, which would be Measure A. I will just say, if that does not pass in November, you will see homelessness. I mean, it goes till 26, so it'll still be, if it doesn't pass. But you will see hundreds of millions of dollars that will not be going towards homelessness. And they leverage that. They leverage those dollars. So Measure A is on the ballot. No one likes taxes. No one likes, it's the same tax we've been paying, a little bit more, on homelessness. But I'm hoping that people will see that from programs that exist, that are out there, that we're seeing some change, that they will support that and hold everyone accountable. Because like cynical, all of that, we have to make sure that there's metrics to that. But a shameless plug a little bit, money does matters for you, and that's an important part of it.
And I'll just say that with Measure A, I think one of the things that's critical to it, which has resulted in my support for it, is the fact that Glendale has a specific amount that we can go in and take what we feel we can use for our homeless services, which is much different than what was happening before, which was giving money and then just hoping and begging to see if we would get something in return. And you're right, without it, the crisis will be compounded. It will be a lot worse than it is now.
All right, so I asked Wendy a raising resources question. Now, Artie, I'm going to ask you a spending resources question. Because in the last 4 or so years, apparently $17.5 billion has been allocated to homelessness, and some smart individuals said, boy, for that money, you could literally take everybody who's unhoused and pay their rent during that time frame. Clearly, that's not the solution. So I wanted to ask you, we'll have Q&A in a minute. I want to ask you. No, I want to ask you. Let's say they go to you and say, all right, because you've been the mayor of a city. You've had to preside over meetings where we say, how do we allocate these resources? How would you allocate resources currently being deployed for homelessness in the city?
It's a great question. I wish I had that kind of money to spend, but the reality of it is, whatever the amount is, the problems are so multifaceted that there's no single panacea. And the problem is we think that throwing money at the problem is going to solve it, right? There's so many things that people are dealing with. And I think it really comes down to mental health. It comes down to how, mental health affects everything. It affects you whether you have a home, and it affects you probably 100 times more if you don't have a home. And I think without the proper mental health
resources. That would be the first place I would spend it, because that is what oftentimes causes people to relapse. You can't hold a job down because you're struggling with some issue. You have problems with social interactions because of that. You are short-tempered, you turn to substance abuse. Substance abuse is not in and of itself a disease. It is oftentimes what people are using to address some other underlying issue. And we, as a country, have failed completely, Democrat, Republican, unaffiliated, and all of that. I'm reminded of Hubert Humphrey. Anyone remember Hubert Humphrey? He was vice president during Lyndon Johnson. He has one of my favorite quotes. He says, "The true moral test of any government is how we treat individuals who are in the dawn of their life, children, how we treat individuals who are in the twilight of life, the seniors, and how we treat those who are in the shadows of life, the oftentimes disabled, those in need, etc." And when we look at what has happened with mental health over the years and all the problems it has caused, from mass school shootings to domestic violence to you name it, we are not addressing the problem. So $17.5 million to pay everyone's rent, great. So now you just housed a bunch of people that still have issues, underlying issues, that will manifest themselves in other ways. So that's one. I don't think that's the solution per se. But in terms of in Glendale and other agencies, I think that going back, I'll address it this way. I think if people could talk to each other and you could have more symposiums like this, you could hear from people what the challenges are, we can make progress. And I didn't know, I thought, I pay my taxes, we pass measures, there's people smarter than me in charge of these issues, it should take care of itself. Until I personally got involved with two cases of homelessness. One was an individual that I knew personally, actually more than a few, but anecdotally, each experience has shown me a breakdown in the system at some point. And I just want to share one story, and I'm sorry I'm speaking for so long on this answer, but I think it's important. I had an individual who had been my car mechanic for a while, reached out to me because he had gotten addicted to painkillers because it's a physically strenuous job, had been arrested because he had been caught with more painkillers and non-prescribed painkillers than he should have, did a stint in county jail for a number of months, long enough for when he came out, his landlord had gotten rid of all of his stuff. It was gone. So he's starting from zero. And he called me, didn't recognize the number at first. I picked it up and we had a conversation, and I was surprised at whether he had fallen to, but he said, "Look, I need my social security card to get a job. But in order to get my social security card, I need to show 2 proofs of citizenship. I need to show a passport and a, I forget what the other document was, but I think maybe a birth certificate or something." So I'm like, all right, no problem, man. Let's take care of this. He's like, Yeah, I called about the passport and the federal government agency, and I forget the name now, ACS, whatever, yes, whatever it is, the acronym, said it'll take 16 to 18 months. And I said, 16, I'm like, nah, this guy, he just, let me handle it. I'm, former mayor of Glendale, I got contacts, I can call people. I called, sure enough, it was about 16 to 18 months. And this is a person who was employable. He had skills. He said, Artie, I could get a job as a mechanic. Tesla will hire me now. I just need a social security card, and I am off to the races. I am reformed. I am clean. I know what mistakes I've made. And it was no dice. And I turned to my elected officials, state senators, assembly, everyone I could talk to, from my congressman on down. I said, what the hell is going on? I said, if this person is not mentally ill now, living on the streets for the next 16 months, he will have some sort of mental condition. So where are the press conferences now? Where's all the big speeches now? Like, how do we cut through that red tape? I mean, and there was no solution to it. And unless someone brings that, I've talked to as many people, including, I'm glad to be in this room today. Maybe I saw a lot of heads nodding because you must have dealt with the same problems with individuals that you're dealing with. And I couldn't believe it because I'm like, this guy cannot be the first nor the last person dealing with this problem. How the hell have we not addressed this yet? I don't know what the answer is. Because if I had a magic wand, I'd say, keep the $17.5 billion. Let's just get every agency in the state and the city and the federal government to work in sync with one another. And so I think those are the problems. Again, Glendale's blessed because we're a small city, we're nimble, we have good relationships with our community-based organizations. I can pick up the phone and talk directly to the police chief, I can talk to the fire. Like, LA is not. I'll give you one other story. We had an individual who lived on the border of Eagle Rock and Glendale. This is a guy who used to busk outside the Trader Joe's. I knew him. A friend called. Do you know him too? You're nodding.
No, I'm like, I know.
Okay, all right. So I thought maybe you knew the guy. He reached out to me, and I called our housing department, and I said, look, can we help this guy? He said, yeah, have him reach out to us. He said, but if he applies with us, he can't say that he's from LA because we'd have to refer him to LA. If he comes to us and says he's in Glendale, we could probably get him inside a temporary housing situation in the next 3 weeks. If he says Los Angeles, it'll take at least 2 months. Those are the kinds of issues that we're dealing with. And so until we can figure out why that is, how we share the resources, how we all, again, row in the same direction, I don't know how this problem gets solved, whether it's $17.5 million or $30 billion or $35 billion.
Yeah. So my last question is for you, Myra. I know we've been talking about how there's an impact from homelessness on infrastructure, but just for a second, let's talk about how infrastructure has maybe contributed to homelessness, because I'm going to talk about eviction, and specifically the inability of adequate regulation up until very recently when it comes to eviction. Last year, Governor Newsom signed the Homelessness Prevention Act, which is designed to prevent landlords from pushing tenants onto the street. And I'm just curious, in your experience, how much does eviction play a role in some of the clients that you see, and how important of an issue is this to putting people in a position where they are unhoused?
Very important. I think I just would like to make it clear that people could still get evicted, right? I think that the legislation that passed allowed and gave protections to our participants to be able to prevent them from, just being evicted from any landlord for any minute, reason. And I think that one of the best things that happened with this legislation was that they were able to give funding to help pay for, rents that were due. Also, gave some support to be able to help with first, last month's rents, things of that nature. But the real, I think, in my perspective, the problem is the amount of not the amount, but how much it costs to live here in Los Angeles. Because at the end of the day, you could have all the protection measures that you want, but the problem is that the cost of living is extremely high. There was a recent study done not too long ago that demonstrated that the cost of living has been increasing so much, but the wages have not. So that's a huge issue. So regardless of all of these different measures that take place, if we are not really tackling the main issue, which is the cost of living, and taking a look at the inflation and things of that nature, then people are going to go back into the streets. So we're spending so much money getting people into interim housing programs, into permanent supportive housing units. Again, but if we're not really addressing, really what the cost is to live in Los Angeles, then we're going back to square one, because these people that we work so hard to place in these permanent supportive housing locations are going to end up back into the streets. And so I think that there's still a lot of work to be done. I think that those are initiatives that have helped us, yes, but it still doesn't take away the main issue where just, again, like I said, the cost of living has been really expensive. And yes, we see it. It's been quite difficult because people, even our residents say, well, if I get a job, I don't still have enough money to live. I need 2 or 3 jobs. And so what do you say to that? So again, we provide the support services, but I think, again, we have to really take a look at what the cost of living is and what we could do to help support a little bit more on that end.
No, that's extremely well said. All right, for those of you who wanted to ask questions, now is the time. Does anyone have any questions for this great panel? John?
So in 2028, we have the Olympics coming to Los Angeles. On the one hand, it'd be a challenge for the homeless population because of temptations to just remove them and to put them out of sight. But are there opportunities for the Olympics coming here because of the amount of investment that's going to come, investment in housing, private-public partnerships and the like, to have some influence by the fact that this monumental event is coming to us?
I will say that don't build more hotels. In Glendale, we put a stop to, you can technically still build a hotel, although we put a moratorium in the downtown. Because the refrain we heard, and for those of you who may not know, cities make a lot of money from hotels. We get the transient occupancy tax, which we can raise because residents don't feel that's a tax on them. It's a tax on people coming from out of town. So a lot of agencies, local agencies, love hotels. And I feel that we need more housing than hotels, permanent housing. And so by building hotels, you're building less housing. What I think the solution will be for the Olympics, because there will probably be a need for hotels, is a lot of cities like Glendale have restrictions on Airbnb rentals. I think for that period of the Olympics, when a lot of Angelenos may want to get the hell out of Dodge, maybe leave LA for a while and rent their home to someone who's coming in from out of town for the Olympics, it may be a good compromise, and then restore some of those restrictions on the Airbnb short-term rentals. So I think that is a potential solution to replacing the need for housing with the construction of new hotels.
So I think I just add to that, those of us who were here in 1984, much older than you could get anywhere in 20 minutes. So those of us aren't going out of town, we're going to the Olympics because it was the best traffic we've ever had. I hope that happens this time. But to respond to you, I think there is a sense of urgency to getting that housing built. There's a sense of urgency in the city of the executive number, I think it's number 1, to expedite housing. So I think the elected officials in Los Angeles and beyond are saying we cannot have what we have now, and so there will be an expedited, not that there wasn't an emergency already, but we also will have the World Cup in 26. We will have, so there's all of these things that are getting us prepared. So I think private investment, is also willing to step up. Everyone wants us to show a good face to the rest of the world. So I see it as an opportunity with some challenges, but an opportunity for that greater investment and focus.
Any other questions? Yes.
One common theme I hear is there isn't communication between the different city departments. And Wendy, I love that LOSA exists. I'm president of the Hollywood Media District BID, and we've had a lot of help through that organization in getting housing, but we still have trouble. One time, CD 13's homeless deputy lost a homeless person that our security located, but she was supposedly looking for him for 2 weeks, right? So there's things like this that I feel like, that's a baby example, but how do we make that connection? How do we communicate more to build on, getting the unhoused off the street?
And I think it is, if I heard it correctly, I mean, I think it is that kind of coordination, particularly again with LASA and the city and county entities talking more frequently, and with Salvation Army and others, everything from improving how we pay, but more importantly, how we ensure that if there's a problem, they don't just say, oh, that's a county issue, or that's this department or that department. I think it is, everyone is thinking much more regionally, and that we're all together. There are lots of, I could go into all the new entities that have been established for different oversight and so forth, but generally, the idea is that there needs to be responsive, that a homeless person, one, doesn't know if they're in the city of Glendale necessarily, or the city of Los Angeles. A homeless person doesn't know when they call 311 or 211 who that is. They just want services. And so I think the more that we can have that communication and that no blocked door for someone to have access to it is really, really important. The housing first, as challenging as that can be for some, allows people to get inside. And we've seen that, because if you are homeless, it is very hard for you to deal with addiction if you have nowhere to go. And I think similarly, when you live in Skid Row and other places, homeless are often the victims of the crime that is occurring, or the drugs that are being sold are from outside. They see that as their great population. So I am hopeful that we will continue to improve in that way.
Well, I think that's a really wonderful place to close, so please join